I never believed in signs from the universe until the day my father's watch stopped working. It was a Tuesday in March, one of those grey mornings where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just threaten you with a possibility. I was running late for work, fumbling with my coffee maker, when I noticed the watch on my wrist had frozen at 3:17. My father's watch. The one thing of his I wore every single day since he died 2 years ago. The watch was a 1968 Omega Seamaster, nothing flashy, but it had been his daily companion for 40 years. When he got sick, really sick, he took it off one afternoon and pressed it into my palm. His hands were shaking. He said, "This kept me on time for everything that mattered. Now it's your turn." I was 26 then, still figuring out who I was, still carrying secrets I thought would break him if he knew. I wore that watch like a promise, like proof that some part of him was still with me. But now it had stopped, and I felt this irrational panic rising in my chest. I know it sounds dramatic, but losing that connection, even to a mechanical object, felt like losing him all over again. I spent my lunch break Googling watch repair shops in Seattle, looking for someone who could fix vintage Omegas. Most places wanted to send it out, quoted me 3 weeks and $400. I couldn't stand the thought of being without it that long. Then I found this tiny shop in Capitol Hill, just a single line listing that said, "Thorn Watch Repair, vintage timepieces by appointment." Something about the simplicity of it appealed to me. I called, and a man answered on the second ring. His voice was quiet, careful, like someone used to handling delicate things. He said he had an opening at 4:30 if I could make it. I said I'd be there. The shop was tucked between a used bookstore and a Thai restaurant, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. The window display had maybe 6 watches arranged on faded velvet and a handwritten sign that said, "Patience required. Miracles possible." I pushed open the door and a small bell chimed. The interior was dim and smelled like machine oil and old wood. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in tiny tools, loops, and parts I couldn't begin to name. Classical music played softly from a radio that looked older than I was, and behind the main counter, bent over something with a jeweller's loop fixed to his eye, was the watchmaker. He looked up when the bell stopped ringing and I felt something shift in my chest. He was maybe 30, with dark curly hair that fell across his forehead, and these incredibly focused grey eyes. He wore a canvas apron over a faded band t-shirt, and his fingers, I noticed immediately, were elegant and precise. He had the kind of face that was hard to look away from, not because it was perfect, but because it was interesting, full of angles and quiet intensity. "Welcome to Thorn," he said, straightening up and removing the loop. "You must be Adrian. I'm Cassian." Cassian. Even his name was unusual, old-fashioned in a way that somehow fit perfectly with the watches, and the classical music and the careful way he moved. I shook his hand, felt the warmth of his palm, the slight calluses on his fingertips. "I'm here about my father's watch," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "It stopped working this morning." He nodded, gestured for me to sit at the counter. "May I see it?" I unstrapped the Omega from my wrist, felt naked without it, and placed it gently on the cloth he'd laid out. He picked it up with a reverence that immediately put me at ease, turning it over, examining the case back, the crown, the crystal. 1968. Seamaster, he said softly. "Beautiful piece. Your father had good taste. He wore it every day of my life until he couldn't anymore," I said. Then he gave it to me. Cassian's eyes met mine, and there was understanding there, the kind you can't fake. "That's a significant inheritance," he said. "Let me take a look at the movement." He opened a drawer and pulled out a case opener, worked with steady confidence until the back came off. Then he positioned his loop and bent close, and I watched him work in silence. There's something hypnotic about watching someone who's truly skilled at their craft. Cassian's focus was absolute, his movements economical and sure. He used tweezers to probe gently at the mechanism, made small humming sounds of consideration. After maybe 5 minutes, he sat back and smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good news," he said. "Nothing's broken. The movement just needs cleaning and fresh lubrication. Happens with vintage pieces, especially if they've been worn daily. The oils dry out." "How long will it take?" I asked, trying not to sound as anxious as I felt. He glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at me. "If you can spare an hour, I can do it now. I don't have another appointment until 6. Really? I said, surprised. Most places wanted weeks. Most places send everything out to a service centre, he said. I do the work here. Besides, he looked down at the watch, then back at me. Some things shouldn't wait. I agreed to stay, and he gestured to an armchair in the corner. Make yourself comfortable. There's tea in the pot if you want, books on the shelf. I'm not much for conversation while I work, but you're welcome to watch if you'd like. I poured myself tea from a ceramic pot that sat on a hot plate, Earl Grey by the smell of it, and settled into the chair with a clear view of his workbench. I thought I'd pull out my phone, catch up on emails, but instead I found myself just watching him. He'd transferred the watch to his main workspace, positioned under a large magnifying lamp. With tools that looked impossibly tiny, he began to disassemble the movement piece by piece, laying each component in careful order on a white tray. The classical music shifted to something I recognized, Debussy maybe, and the light from the lamp cast everything in warm gold. Cassian worked with this meditative focus, occasionally making notes in a leather journal, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was something beautiful about it. The care he took, the way he treated each tiny gear and spring like it mattered. I realized I was seeing someone do exactly what they were meant to do, and there's something magnetic about that kind of certainty. After maybe 20 minutes, he spoke without looking up. Your father? Was he a punctual man? The question caught me off guard. Very, I said, almost obsessively. He used to say being late was a way of telling someone their time wasn't valuable. Cassian nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. You can tell a lot about someone by their watch, how they wear it, maintain it, what they choose. This Seamaster, it's not a flashy piece. It's understated, reliable, built to last. Says he valued substance over show. That was him exactly, I said, feeling emotion tighten my throat. He was a high school English teacher. He used to tell his students that character is what you do when no one's watching. Sounds like someone I would have liked, Cassian said quietly. He'd moved on to cleaning the components, dipping them in solutions, using brushes I could barely see. My father was a watchmaker too, he continued. That's how I learned. He used to say that watches are about more than time, they're about moments. The ones we want to hold on to, the ones we're afraid of losing. Is this his shop? I asked. Was, Cassian said. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack very sudden. He left me the shop, all his tools, and about 1,000 unfinished repairs. He laughed softly, but there was grief underneath it. I spent 6 months finishing everyone's watches before I could start taking new clients. It felt important, you know, to complete what he'd started. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only exists between people who understand loss. I watched him reassemble the movement, each piece fitting back into place with satisfying precision. So you're carrying on his work, I said eventually. Trying to, he replied. Some days I feel like I'm doing it right, honouring what he taught me. Other days I wonder if I'm just hiding here, afraid to figure out what else I might want. He paused, looked up at me with those grey eyes. Sorry, I don't usually talk this much. Something about you feels safe. My heart did this little skip. I know what you mean, I said. About hiding, I mean. I've spent a lot of time doing that. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then returned to the watch. By the time he'd reassembled everything, adjusted the regulation, and closed the case back, nearly an hour had passed. He wound the crown carefully, held the watch to his ear, then smiled. Perfect, he said. Listen. He handed it to me and I held it to my ear, heard the steady tick, tick, tick that had been absent that morning. Relief washed over me so strongly I had to blink back tears. Thank you, I said. How much do I owe you? Cassian shook his head. No charge. I stared at him. What? No, I can't. This took you an hour of skilled work. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, that small smile back on his face. Some things deserve care, not commerce. Your father's watch. The way you talked about him. The fact that you wear it every day. That matters. I'm not going to charge you for that. I didn't know what to say. I'd lived in cities long enough to be suspicious of kindness, to look for the angle, but there was none. Just this man with careful hands and kind eyes offering me something I hadn't expected. At least let me buy you coffee, I said, or dinner, please. He considered this, and I saw something flicker across his face, uncertainty maybe, or hope. Okay, he said, There's a Thai place next door that's actually good. We could go now if you want." We closed up the shop together, and I helped him cover the workbenches, turn off the lights. Walking next door felt significant somehow, like crossing a threshold. The restaurant was small and warm, smelling of basil and lemongrass. We got a table by the window and ordered without really looking at the menu, both of us more interested in continuing the conversation that had started in the shop. Over pad thai and green curry, I learned that Cassian had studied art history before becoming a watchmaker, that he played piano badly but enthusiastically, that he'd lived in Seattle for 5 years and still felt like he was figuring out where he belonged. He asked about my work, and I told him about my job at an architecture firm, how I spent my days designing spaces for other people to live in while my own apartment remained half unpacked 2 years after moving in. "Sounds like you're good at creating homes for everyone but yourself," he observed, and the accuracy of it stung a little. "Maybe," I admitted. "I think I've been waiting for something to feel right before I commit to it, you know? Like I'm perpetually in transition." "From what?" he asked gently. I took a breath, felt the familiar fear rise up, then pushed through it. "From pretending," I said. "I spent most of my 20s trying to be what I thought I should be. What would make my parents proud? What would fit the narrative everyone expected? My father died before I could tell him I'm gay, before I could stop hiding." Cassian's expression softened with understanding. "And you think he wouldn't have accepted you?" "I don't know," I said honestly. He was traditional in a lot of ways, religious, conservative politically, but he was also kind, curious, willing to learn. I'll never know which side would have won out, and that's the part I can't forgive myself for, not giving him the chance. "For what it's worth," Cassian said quietly, "the fact that he gave you his watch, that he trusted you with something that mattered to him, that says a lot. People don't give their most valuable possessions to people they don't believe in. I'd never thought of it that way." "Maybe you're right," I said. "I came out to my dad 6 months before he died," Cassian offered. "He was quiet for a long time after I told him, and I thought I'd broken something between us. Then he said, 'Well, that explains why you never brought girls around.' And then he asked if there was someone special. Just like that. No drama, no rejection, just acceptance and curiosity about my life. That must have been a relief," I said. "It was everything," he replied. "Those last 6 months we talked more honestly than we ever had. About love, about fear, about what makes a life meaningful. I wouldn't trade that time for anything, but I also know how lucky I was, and I'm sorry you didn't get that closure." We talked until the restaurant started closing, until the servers were clearly waiting for us to leave. Outside, the spring evening had turned cool, and we stood on the sidewalk in that awkward space where you have to decide if the night is over or just beginning. "I should let you go," Cassian said, but he didn't move. "I don't want you to," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. He smiled, and it was different from the careful smiles I'd seen before, wider, more open. "Then don't. There's a bar around the corner that doesn't close until 2. We could keep talking." We went to the bar, a dim place with good whiskey and better music, and we talked until last call. We talked about everything and nothing, the big questions and the small observations, and somewhere in those hours I realized I was falling. Not just attracted, though I was definitely that, but genuinely falling for this careful, thoughtful man who fixed broken things and saw value where others saw only commerce. When he finally walked me to my car, we stood close in the parking garage, and I could feel the pull between us like gravity. "Thank you," I said, "for the watch, for dinner, for all of it. Can I see you again?" he asked. "Like, intentionally, not just if your watch breaks," I laughed. "Yes, definitely yes." He reached out and adjusted the watch on my wrist, his fingers warm against my skin. "It looks good on you," he said, "like it belongs there." We made plans for the weekend, exchanged numbers, and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. That night I lay in bed, listening to the watch tick on my nightstand, and for the first time since my father died, I felt like maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The weekend came, and we met at a coffee shop in Fremont. Cassian arrived wearing jeans and a dark green sweater that made his eyes look even more striking, his hair slightly damp like he'd just showered. We got coffee and walked along the canal, talking easily like we'd known each other for years instead of days. He told me about learning to repair his first watch at 12, how his father had let him take apart a broken pocket watch and figure out how to put it back together. "It took me 3 weeks," he said, and I lost half the screws, but when it finally ticked again, I understood what my father meant about patience and precision. I told him about my father's love of literature, how he'd read to me every night when I was young, how he could quote Shakespeare and Whitman and Neruda from memory. He gave me his love of words, I said, even if I use them to describe buildings instead of write poems. Words are words, Cassian said. They build things either way. We had lunch at a Vietnamese place he loved, then spent the afternoon at the Seattle Art Museum. Walking through the galleries with him was different than going alone. He noticed details I'd miss, pointed out techniques and historical context, made me see familiar paintings in new ways. In front of a Renaissance portrait, he said, "See how the artist painted the subject's hands in such detail? In that era, hands were considered as important as faces for revealing character. How someone held themselves, what they touched, whether their hands were relaxed or tense." "What do my hands say?" I asked, holding them up. He took one of my hands in both of his, studied it with the same focus he'd given my father's watch. "That you're careful," he said. "You have architect's hands, precise, deliberate." But also, he traced a line along my palm. "You bite your nails when you're anxious, and you've got a scar here that looks old." "Childhood accident?" "Fell off my bike when I was 8, I confirmed. Needed 6 stitches. He smiled, still holding my hand. "Your hands say you're someone who builds things, but also someone who's been hurt and healed. Someone who's more careful now but still willing to take risks. The intimacy of the moment, standing in a museum gallery with him holding my hand and reading my history like a map, made my breath catch." "What do your hands say?" I asked. "That I work with tiny objects and probably need to moisturize more," he said lightly, but I could see the deflection. I squeezed his fingers gently. "Tell me for real." He looked down at our joined hands. "They say I'm my father's son," he said quietly. "Same long fingers, same calluses in the same places. Sometimes I look at them working and forget they're mine. I see his hands and I don't know if that's comforting or sad. Maybe both," I suggested. "Maybe it's okay for it to be both." We left the museum and walked through Pike Place Market, weaving through tourists and flower stalls and fish vendors. Cassian bought tulips from a stand, deep purple ones, and handed them to me with a shy smile. "For your half-unpacked apartment," he said. "Maybe they'll help it feel more like home." That night we had dinner at my place, and I cooked pasta while he explored my space, looking at the architectural drawings I had framed on the walls, the books stacked on every surface, the boxes I still hadn't unpacked in the corner. "You weren't kidding about the transitional state," he observed. "I'm a work in progress," I said, stirring sauce. "Aren't we all?" he replied, coming to stand beside me at the stove. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and woody. "Can I help with anything?" "You could open the wine," I said, gesturing to the bottle on the counter. We moved around the kitchen together with surprising ease, and when we finally sat down to eat, it felt natural, comfortable, like we'd done this 100 times before. After dinner, we ended up on the couch with more wine, talking about our families, our fears, the futures we imagined for ourselves. I told him about the guilt I carried, not just about my father, but about all the years I'd spent hiding, pretending, letting people assume things about me rather than correcting them. "It feels like I wasted so much time," I said, "like I missed out on my 20s because I was too afraid to live them honestly." "But you're here now," Cassian said. "You're not hiding anymore. That counts for something." "Is it enough, though?" I asked. "Can you make up for lost time?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't think it works that way," he said finally. "I think you just have to start from where you are and build forward. Like watch repair, you can't undo the damage that's already happened. You can only clean it, fix what's broken, and make sure it works going forward." "When did you get so wise?" I asked, smiling. "When I spent a year in therapy after my dad died," he said wryly. "Turns out grief requires professional help sometimes." We talked until late, until we were both yawning, and when Cassian said he should go, I walked him to the door slowly, reluctant for the night to end. "Thank you for today," I said. "All of it." "Thank you for letting me in," he replied. "Not just into your apartment, into everything else too." We stood close in the doorway, and I could feel the tension between us, the question of what comes next hanging in the air. I wanted to kiss him, but wasn't sure if it was too soon, if I was reading things right. Then Cassian reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, his touch gentle, and said, "I really want to kiss you right now. but I also want to do this right. Can I take you out again?" "Yes," I said, relief and anticipation flooding through me. "Definitely yes." He smiled, squeezed my hand, and left. I closed the door and leaned against it, grinning like an idiot, feeling like a teenager with a crush. My father's watch showed 11:42, and I thought about what Cassian had said, about watches being about moments we want to hold on to. This was one of those moments. We fell into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Cassian would close the shop early some days and we'd meet for dinner. Other times I'd stop by with coffee and watch him work, comfortable in the silence, reading in the armchair while he restored timepieces. On weekends we explored the city together, finding hidden bookstores and trying new restaurants and walking through neighbourhoods we'd never visited. One Saturday afternoon we drove out to Discovery Park and hiked down to the beach. It was one of those perfect Pacific Northwest days, cool and clear, with the Olympics visible across the Sound. We walked along the shore, collecting interesting stones, talking about everything and nothing. Cassian told me about his dream of eventually teaching watchmaking, passing on what his father had taught him. I told him about wanting to design homes for people who couldn't normally afford architects, about making beautiful spaces accessible. "You should do that," he said. "You light up when you talk about it." "It's just a dream," I said. "The firm I work for only does high-end residential, so find a different firm or start your own," he said simply. "Life's too short to spend it building other people's dreams instead of your own." We sat on a large driftwood log, shoulders touching, watching the waves. I felt brave suddenly, brave enough to ask the question that had been circling in my mind for weeks. "What are we doing, Cassian? I mean, I know what I hope we're doing, but I don't want to assume." He turned to face me, his grey eyes serious. "I'm falling for you, Adrian. Pretty significantly, actually. I have been since the day you walked into my shop with your father's watch and trusted me with something that mattered. I want this to be real, if you do." I kissed him then, finally, leaning in and pressing my lips to his. He tasted like the peppermint tea he'd been drinking, and his hand came up to cut my face, gentle and sure. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as we both relaxed into it. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," I admitted. "Me too," he said. "I was trying to be patient, to not rush things, but patience has its limits." We kissed again, longer this time, and it felt like something clicking into place, like gears aligning perfectly. When we finally pulled apart, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We should probably head back," Cassian said reluctantly. "But come home with me, not for anything, just to be together." I agreed, and we drove to his apartment in Capitol Hill, a small one-bedroom above a coffee shop. The space was exactly what I'd expected, full of books and watches and classical records, warm and lived in and completely him. We ordered takeout and ate on his couch, then put on a movie neither of us really watched, too focused on each other, on the newness of being able to touch freely, to kiss without questioning if it was allowed. That night I stayed over, and we fell asleep tangled together in his bed, my father's watch on his nightstand next to his own, ticking in sync. I woke up early to sunlight streaming through the windows and Cassian still asleep beside me, his face peaceful and unguarded. I thought about all the years I'd spent afraid of this, of wanting someone like this, and felt grateful that I'd finally found the courage to stop hiding. The months that followed were the happiest I could remember. Cassian and I fell into each other's lives seamlessly. I finally unpacked those boxes in my apartment, hung pictures, bought real furniture. He started teaching a watchmaking class at a community college on Thursday nights and came home energized, full of stories about his students. We talked about the future not as something distant and theoretical, but as something we were building together. One evening in early summer, I stopped by the shop after work to find Cassian closing up early. He had a strange expression on his face, nervous and excited at once. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." We drove to a small commercial space in Ballard, empty except for good light and hardwood floors. Cassian pulled out a key and unlocked the door. "What is this?" I asked. "It could be a studio," he said. "A bigger workshop for me, space for more equipment, room to teach classes. Or," he looked at me carefully, "it could be a shared space. Your architecture practice, my workshop, together. I know it's fast, and maybe I'm crazy, but I can't stop thinking about building something with you, literally and figuratively." I walked through the space imagining it, seeing the possibilities. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Completely," he said. "I've been saving for years to expand the business, and this place just became available. But when I saw it, all I could think about was how perfect it would be for both of us. No pressure, though. If it's too much too soon." I turned to face him, this man who had somehow become essential to me in just a few months, who saw me completely and chose me anyway. "It's not too soon," I said. "It's exactly right." We signed the lease 2 weeks later and spent the summer building out the space together. Cassian designed his workshop with the precision you'd expect, every tool having its place, the lighting perfect for detailed work. I set up my drafting table by the windows, created a small meeting area for clients, hung my drawings on the walls. We painted together on weekends, argued good-naturedly about colour choices, celebrated each milestone with cheap champagne. The day we officially opened, we threw a small party. Friends came, former clients, Cassian students, colleagues from my firm. Standing in the space we'd created together, watching Cassian laugh with someone across the room, I felt my father's watch tick steadily on my wrist and thought about inheritance. Not just the physical objects we leave behind, but the values, the lessons, the love that persists beyond death. My father had given me this watch as a reminder that time matters, that moments are precious. But he'd also given me, without knowing it, the capacity to love honestly, to value substance over appearance, to believe that character is what you do when no one's watching. And Cassian, with his careful hands and generous heart, had shown me that it's never too late to start living authentically, to build something real. That night, after everyone had left and we were cleaning up, Cassian came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Very," I said, leaning back against him. "Thank you for seeing me, for all of this. Thank you for trusting me with your father's watch," he said, "for giving me a reason to believe in signs from the universe." I turned in his arms to face him. "Do you really think it was a sign? The watch stopping that day?" He smiled. "I think sometimes things break at exactly the right moment, giving us permission to seek help, to make connections we might not have made otherwise. Your watch brought you to me, and I'll always be grateful for that." We kissed there in our shared space, surrounded by the tools of our trades, the evidence of what we were building together. Outside, the summer evening was fading into night, and somewhere in the city, other people were living their own stories, finding their own signs, and learning their own lessons about love and time and second chances. I don't know what my father would have thought about Cassian, about us, about the life I'm building now, but I like to think he'd approve. He always said that character is what you do when no one's watching, and loving Cassian, choosing him every day, building a life that's honest and full and mine, that feels like character to me. It feels like finally becoming the person my father's watch was meant to keep time for, the person I was always supposed to be. And every morning when I strap that Omega to my wrist, when I hear it ticking steadily, keeping perfect time thanks to Cassian's careful hands, I'm reminded that some things deserve care, not commerce. That love, real love, is about seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. That it's never too late to stop hiding and start living. That sometimes the universe does send signs, and sometimes those signs come in the form of a broken watch, and a watchmaker who knows that some repairs are about more than mechanics. They're about healing, connection, and finding your way home.